During the altar call, Darlene Brooks stepped into the aisle and named Cedar House, a property I had never heard of, though my husband had bought it with our church's mercy offerings. The organist lifted both hands from the keys. A paper prayer fan slipped from Sister Yvonne's fingers and landed face up beneath the pew. My throat tightened so suddenly that swallowing felt like trying to move through a locked door. Darlene stood beneath the open sanctuary doors with a manila envelope pressed against her chest. Behind her, late morning light crossed the aisle in narrow bands, exposing dust that had been floating there all along. My husband, Reverend Marcus Hale, did not look shocked. He looked wounded by the inconvenience of being known, and when I saw that expression, I understood that the secret had not escaped him. It had simply reached the one room he believed he controlled. I was 52 years old and had been married to Marcus for 24 years. We served at Greater Promise Church of God in Christ, a red brick congregation outside Richmond with a deep sanctuary, a narrow choir room, and a courtyard garden planted by the church mothers before either of us held a title. My grandmother had worshipped there. My mother had directed the junior choir there. I had learned to fold funeral programs at its fellowship hall tables and to recognize which mothers needed a cushion placed at the end of their pew before they ever asked. The church had held my family together through layoffs, illness, and grief. That history made me protective. Marcus arrived as a young minister with a careful voice and a gift for making Scripture feel close. People said he carried vision while I carried detail. By the time he became senior pastor, I was directing the women's ministry, coordinating benevolence requests, and overseeing the annual mercy offering, a restricted fund used for emergency rent, utility bills, funeral travel, and temporary shelter. My deepest desire was not to be admired beside Marcus. I wanted the church that had protected women like my mother to remain trustworthy after we were gone. For years, I confused protecting the church with protecting its pastor from difficult questions. An institution hidden from truth is not safe. It is merely dependent on the person controlling the answers. The first irregularity appeared 9 months before the altar call. After Wednesday Bible study, Sister Laverne and I were reconciling mercy offering deposits in the finance room when she showed me a $48,000 transfer into a line called property stabilization. "What property?" I asked. "Pastor approved it. Trustee Chair Daniels countersigned." Marcus had been speaking for months about renovating Naomi House, a church-owned duplex at the rear edge of the property. The plan was to provide 6 months of transitional housing for women leaving unsafe situations. When I asked Marcus in the church office, he closed the door before answering. "The bank needed reserves to secure the next phase," he said. "It is temporary." Why was it moved from a restricted fund? Because that is where the available cash was. Available does not mean unrestricted. Marcus rarely became openly angry. He used disappointment, as though a question revealed weakness in the person asking it. "You know what Naomi House will mean for women," he said. "Do not let accounting language make you small-minded about ministry." It embarrassed me, though it should have alarmed me. Spiritual manipulation often borrows the language of purpose until caution resembles disobedience. I told myself the transfer would be replaced before the next quarterly report. I did not tell Laverne about our conversation. That silence was my first contribution to what followed. Naomi House became the center of our church anniversary campaign. Women donated in memory of mothers, sisters, and daughters. The usher board sponsored 1 bedroom. The choir purchased kitchen appliances. Mother Beatrice, who lived on a fixed income, brought $20 in an envelope marked, "For a woman who needs a door that locks." During Sunday announcements, Marcus spoke about restoration and the church's obligation to shelter women rebuilding their lives. The congregation stood and applauded, and I stood with them. Meanwhile, mercy assistance checks began taking longer to clear. A widow named Mrs. Corrine waited 3 weeks for a utility payment. A young mother from the choir was told the fund had reached its limit. Laverne began covering small requests from the general account, while I repeated Marcus's promise that the money was coming back. One evening, after women's ministry rehearsal, I found a second transfer. $65,000 had moved through a newly created account called Kingdom Property Reserve. The authorization carried Marcus's electronic signature and a scan of Trustee Daniels's initials. I printed the page and placed it in my Bible beneath Psalm 15, where the faithful are described as those who speak truth from the heart. I read the line twice and still returned the paper to the drawer the next morning. I called my decision patience. In truth, it was fear dressed in church language. I feared donors would withdraw. I feared Naomi House would close before opening. I feared the mothers who had trusted us would feel foolish. I feared that questioning Marcus publicly would turn every sacrifice the women made into a scandal attached to my marriage. A mature woman can endure much when she believes other people's safety depends on her silence. But carrying a burden quietly does not make the burden righteous. Darlene Brooks entered the matter through paperwork. She was 46, a licensed real estate closing agent, and had served on Greater Promises Housing Committee for 3 years. She was careful, private, and not easily impressed by titles. One Saturday, she found me in the women's ministry room arranging folders for the Naomi House volunteer orientation. "Did the church purchase another property?" she asked. "No." She watched me for a moment. "Are you certain?" "Naomi House is the only project approved by the congregation." Darlene kept one hand on the back of a chair. "Pastor Hale asked me to notarize a document connected to Kingdom Property Reserve," she said. "He said the board had approved confidentiality." "Did you read it?" "Enough to know the buyer was not Greater Promise Church." Marcus appeared at the open door carrying anniversary programs. "We are almost there," he said. "Naomi House will be a testimony." After he left, Darlene whispered, "I need to check something before I say more." Instead of asking her to speak, I told her to be careful. That was another form of protection. I was not protecting Darlene from danger. I was protecting myself from a fact I could no longer organize into a harmless explanation. Women are often taught to wait for certainty long after a pattern is clear. The demand for perfect proof can become another way to prevent the injured person from acting on what she already knows. The strain of silence entered every ministry meeting. In the church kitchen, women stretched meal budgets while the anniversary committee approved new banners. In the fellowship hall, volunteers assembled welcome baskets for Naomi House, even though the plumbing contractor had stopped work over unpaid invoices. Marcus kept preaching, "Do not mistake delay for denial." The phrase drew applause, but I heard his method of control. Every question was postponed until after the next offering, board meeting, or special service, when clarity would supposedly be safer. Sister Laverne finally refused to sign the monthly report. She met me in the finance room and placed the unsigned page between us. "I cannot certify money I cannot trace," she said. "You are right. Then stand with me." Across the hall, women carried donated linens into storage. "If this becomes public now, the whole project may collapse," I said. Laverne's expression softened, but she did not retreat. "First Lady, the project may already have collapsed. We just have not been allowed to see where it fell." She removed her treasurer badge and placed it on the desk. "I will not accuse anyone without evidence, but I will not lend my name to a report that hides what I cannot explain." Her boundary exposed the weakness in mine. I had believed endurance meant staying in position until I could repair the harm quietly. Laverne understood that integrity sometimes begins by refusing to make a false document look complete. She did not abandon the church. She stopped allowing it to use her credibility as camouflage. I met Marcus in the sanctuary after Thursday choir rehearsal. The pews were empty, and the altar flowers had begun to bend at the edges. Someone had left one white carnation on the front pew, separated from the arrangement. I placed copies of both transfers on the communion table. "Where did the money go?" I asked. "I told you. Property stabilization. For Naomi House? For the broader housing vision. I am asking about restricted offerings given by people who trusted us." "Ministry requires flexibility," he said. "The board cannot vote on every opportunity." "Did the church buy another house?" "We secured an asset." "In whose name?" "The structure is temporary." "Whose name, Marcus?" His jaw tightened. "You have spent years asking me to expand the ministry. Now that I am doing it, you are frightened by the scale. I recognized the turn. He had moved from refusing the question to diagnosing the woman asking it. I'm not frightened by scale, I said. I'm frightened by secrecy, financed with mercy money. If you expose a technical decision before the refinancing closes, Naomi House loses everything, he said. Is that what you want attached to your name? There it was. Not a denial, but a burden assigned to me. He made his choices, then offered me responsibility for their consequences. I told him I would give him until the trustee meeting on Saturday to produce the deed, the authorization, and a complete accounting. When he called me dramatic, I gathered the papers. No, I answered. I am finally being specific. Saturday's trustee meeting took place in the church conference room. Marcus arrived with a summary sheet, but no deed. Trustee Daniels admitted he had allowed his initials to be scanned months earlier for routine banking documents. He denied authorizing the second transfer. Marcus called the discrepancy an administrative misunderstanding. Darlene did not attend. I found her in the prayer room with the manila envelope resting in her lap. She had pulled the public property record, the closing statement, and the limited liability company registration. Tell me what it says, I said. The buyer is Promise Renewal Holdings, she answered. I need to speak in front of the trustees. I signed as a witness. Marcus told me the company belonged to the church. My notary stamp is on the closing affidavit. If I walk into that room, he will say I misunderstood. Fear lived beneath her precision. She had a license and a reputation beyond the church, and Marcus had placed her professional name inside a transaction she did not fully understand. Darlene, I will not ask you to risk yourself for me, but whatever you decide, do not let his title become your explanation for your own signature. The trustees delayed action until Sunday afternoon because Marcus insisted the annual altar service could not be disrupted by incomplete information. I agreed, not because I trusted him, because I had decided that if the documents were not produced after service, I would read the transfers aloud to the trustees myself. For the first time, my silence had an ending. The annual altar service began at 10:30 Sunday morning. The mothers wore white, the choir wore burgundy, and fresh lilies made the sanctuary look untouched by human failure. I sat in my usual chair beside the pulpit, but I did not wear the First Lady corsage. Marcus preached from Luke 19 about Zacchaeus and restitution. He spoke of returning what had been taken. The irony did not make me angry. It made me tired. There comes a moment when a woman stops searching a man's words for evidence of the man he could be. She begins measuring them against the choices he has already made. At the end of the sermon, Marcus invited anyone carrying hidden guilt to come forward. The organ began softly as people entered the aisles. Then Darlene stood and walked to the center with the manila envelope against her chest. That was the moment from the beginning. The organist lifted both hands from the keys. Darlene looked at Marcus, then at the congregation. I need to confess that I notarized papers I was told belonged to this church, she said. They were used to purchase Cedar House at 614 Waverly Avenue. The name meant nothing to me. It was not Naomi House or any property approved by Greater Promise. A paper fan slipped beneath Sister Yvonne's pew. Darlene opened the envelope. The mercy offering paid the down payment and repairs. The property is owned by Promise Renewal Holdings. The company belongs to Reverend Marcus Hale and his brother, Clifton. No one shouted. The silence was heavier than noise. Water from the baptismal fountain continued falling behind the choir loft, soft and steady, as though time had refused to stop for any of us. Marcus stepped away from the pulpit. This is not the appropriate setting. Darlene faced him. You chose the setting when you preached restitution while these papers were still hidden. He looked toward me. For 24 years, I had known every expression Marcus used in public. What I saw then was not panic, but offense that the room no longer accepted his version first. I rose from my chair. Is Cedar House owned by this church? I asked. Marcus did not answer. Did the congregation authorize the purchase? He looked toward Trustee Daniels. Did restricted mercy offering funds pay for it? His silence became the clearest statement he had made all year. I turned to the congregation. "The altar is not a place where truth embarrasses the church," I said. "It is where we stop asking appearances to save us." Then I stepped down from the platform and stood beside Darlene. Not because she had done everything right, because she had finally refused to let her mistake remain useful to a greater deception. The service ended without a closing celebration. Bishop Warren, the jurisdictional superintendent, asked Marcus to remain in the pastor's study, while trustees, finance officers, Darlene, and I gathered in the fellowship hall. The documents showed that $113,000 from Mercy Assistance had been used for the down payment, repairs, and closing costs on Cedar House. The property had been rented to a private counseling practice operated by Clifton Hale. Monthly rent was being deposited into Promise Renewal Holdings, not the church. Marcus claimed he planned to refinance Cedar House, repay the restricted fund, and later donate rental income to Naomi House. He had convinced himself that vision granted him temporary ownership over other people's trust. Entitlement can wear the face of sacrifice when good intentions are used to excuse secret control. The formal discipline process began that afternoon. Marcus was suspended from preaching and financial authority pending an external audit. He was ordered not to contact staff about records or influence the trustees' testimony. Marcus argued that removing him would destroy the ministry he believed he had built and owned. The women of Greater Promise responded beyond any official report. Sister Laverne sat beside me through every audit meeting with duplicate ledgers, refusing to let my memory carry what documents could hold. Mother Beatrice organized meals for Darlene after members began blaming her for speaking during worship. "Confession is not clean just because it comes late," she said. "But we do not punish a woman for finally telling the truth. A man profited from her hiding." Sister Yvonne and the usher board reopened the emergency pantry using their own monthly dues until the restricted fund was restored. Mother Odessa walked with me each evening through the church garden. She did not ask whether I would remain married. She asked whether I had eaten, slept, or been pressured to decide before my body recovered from the shock. That care taught me something useful. A community does not support a wounded woman by deciding her future for her. It supports her by making sure fear, hunger, exhaustion, and public shame do not decide it in her place. The external audit confirmed every transfer, including insurance and landscaping payments hidden inside anniversary expenses. No money had purchased personal luxuries, but restricted offerings are not purified by a leader's private plan to repay them later. Trust is not a line of credit. Bishop Warren placed Marcus under formal church discipline for financial misconduct, deception, and abuse of pastoral authority. He was removed as senior pastor and barred from holding financial office during a 2-year restoration process supervised outside Greater Promise. His fall did not feel like victory. Some members accused the trustees of destroying a gifted pastor over paperwork and said I should have handled it as a wife. I had asked in the office, sanctuary, and conference room. He had used every private setting to delay what public money required him to disclose. Privacy can protect intimacy. It must never privatize accountability. The settlement required Promise Renewal Holdings to sell Cedar House and return the money with interest. The restored funds paid overdue Mercy Assistance requests and completed Naomi House. A local nonprofit bought Cedar House and converted it into offices for licensed family counselors. The house I had never heard of did not remain a monument to Marcus's control. It became part of the restitution his secrecy had made necessary. Darlene accepted professional discipline and helped establish a rule requiring 2 independent reviewers for every property transaction. Laverne returned as treasurer only after the church adopted monthly public summaries for restricted funds. I resigned from the ceremonial parts of being First Lady, but remained Women's Ministry Director. For the first time, the role belonged to my calling rather than my husband's office. I had believed loyalty meant helping Marcus carry vision. I now understood that loyalty without truth had become abandonment of my own conscience. I did not need revenge. I needed my no to mean no, and my faith to survive the loss of a man's title. 3 months later, I entered the sanctuary before sunrise prayer. Small yellow roses were opening near the altar, and morning light crossed the aisle where Darlene had stood. Clarity had arrived slowly, like light over water, showing first the surface and then the stones beneath it. During a supervised visit in the church courtyard, Marcus said he believed he could replace the money before anyone was hurt. People were already being denied help, I answered. You counted harm only after it reached you. I did not rush to comfort him. Forgiveness does not require a woman to protect a man from accurate understanding. I would consider reconciliation only after discipline, counseling, and sustained transparency. Whether our marriage would continue remained uncertain. My dignity did not. Psalm 15 asks, "Who may stand in God's holy place?" And it answers with truth spoken from the heart. Truth is not the enemy of mercy. It is what keeps mercy from becoming permission. Peace is not the quiet that follows a woman's surrender. It is the steadiness that comes when nothing essential must be hidden for love to remain. God did not ask me to save the church by disappearing inside its reputation. He gave me enough grace to stand where the secret was named and enough wisdom to stop carrying what belonged to accountability. This space is for women who protected sacred places until they learned that truth was part of what made those places sacred. If you have ever been asked to keep an institution peaceful by carrying what its leaders would not name, share only what feels safe in the comments. Your clarity may help another woman understand that dignity can begin with one honest question left unanswered no longer.